Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. I'm Pastor Siri. I'm a Lutheran pastor, but I'm also a spiritual seeker. And one of the things that I love as a huge healing modality in my own life is IFS, or internal family systems therapy. Today I'm going to show how you can use IFS in your daily life with just a couple simple ideas that can radically transform the way that you process your emotions and the way that you see what's going on inside of yourself. So take a listen. Now, in a former video, I actually explained what IFS, or internal family systems therapy, is and where it comes from. I'm not going to go into the whole history of it again. I will say just very briefly, because it's worth reminding people that the model is so very different from what we've been taught. We've been taught that, like, for example, I'm a Siri, just a Siri, and I have this sort of one particular personality and everything like that. And that any sort of sense that I might have another voice or another perspective in my head is kind of dismissed or met with skepticism, even though every single person experiences sort of a multitude of different thoughts and feelings going through them all at once. And maybe people have explanations of where they think that comes from. One simplistic idea, for example, is you've got the devil on the one shoulder and the angel on the other shoulder, and you're like, oh, it's your conscience, it's your ego, it's this, it's that. Well, IFS explains this very differently. IFS basically says that we are naturally multiple, every single one of us on this planet. We have various parts within ourselves, and the parts have their own personalities, they have their own desires, their own dreams, their own gifts that they bring to the collective. And what can happen is when we experience trauma or something that's very hurtful, especially in our younger ages, one of those parts will often take on that trauma, and it's called a burden. And oftentimes then the other parts might sort of exile or push that part out of the way to protect it. And so we often have little exiled parts within ourselves, which is like that wounded inner child. And then we've got protective parts that are making sure that nobody hurts that child again. And then we have these like manager parts that sort of make sure we get through our day-to-day lives. And they're all very, very different from each other. So I'm an Enneagram 3, and I did notice that my manager parts are very 3-like. They like to be organized, they like to be competent, they want to be seen very well. They would answer the question, I am worthy when others think well of me. And that's a very 3 response on the Enneagram. None of these parts are bad, by the way. Absolutely none of them are bad. They may at times, because they're trying to protect us from things, kind of compulsively force us to do certain behaviors that we know aren't maybe good in the long term. They could be self-sabotaging behaviors. It's also possible that one of our parts could take on the voice of like the inner critic, or something that feels kind of nasty and mean. And we maybe hate that part. But once we investigate a little bit more of why that part is doing what it's doing, it's usually trying to help us somehow. And so part of what IFS believes is that we are multiple inside, but that underneath all of that, we have what's called the self, the big S self. And you could call this your Buddha nature, your Christ consciousness. You could call this your child of God self. You could call this the divine light that lives within you. And this divine light is not pushy. It is not pushy, and it is not controlling. And so it can sort of be pushed out of the way by the parts. It doesn't control the parts. It doesn't tell the parts what to do, because it is in and of its nature compassionate, calm, courageous, clear, and gentle. There's a gentleness to it in which it won't force its agenda, because honestly, it doesn't really have an agenda except ultimately to heal. And so when we get in touch with the self, and when we let that self embody a little bit more of our holistic self, then that self can relate to the parts that are wounded and can check in with them. And that is an incredibly healing process, because the self in and of itself is not judgmental. And that's huge. Think about it. If you're really feeling strong emotions, you're upset, you're scared, you're angry, and someone comes to sit down and talk with you, if you sense they have an agenda to try to calm you down or they're judging you, you're not really going to open up to them, are you? You're not. You're going to be really defensive if you do, and you're going to be like, yeah, well, just tell me I'm wrong, right? So, but if you actually have someone sit down who's like, tell me, and you start talking to them and they're like, I hear you, I understand you, I feel your pain, and you really genuinely realize they have no agenda and they are listening to you, then you're going to open up more. That's exactly what happens inside when we connect with ourself, and then when we use ourself while we're in self, however you want to use the proper words, to communicate with these little parts, we are able to get them to tell us really what their hurt is, what they're afraid of, what they want, and they can release some of their burdens. A lot of parts are carrying like really old school notions about what's going to help us get through life, like beliefs that come from the brain of a 7-year-old or a 12-year-old. And I'm 47. So I've lived a lot more life, and I know there's so much more out there than maybe what a 7-year-old does. But these parts can sometimes get locked in time, and they're just progressing in a way that they think is the only way. It's all they know. And so greeting them with loving kindness and maybe even giving them another way to be can really sort of open up for them their little world and relax things that happen inside of you. Okay, so that's the introduction. Now here's the toolkit for you. First of all, according to IFS, the belief is that there's multiple things going on. That's why you can feel angry and you can feel sad and you can have like polarizing or opposing desires at the same time. I often use the very simple thing of, I want to eat the cake, I don't want to eat the cake. One part of me is like, that cake looks good, let's eat it, even though it's not good for us, it's blah, 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 blah. And another voice is saying, no, you shouldn't eat it because it's not good for you, because you're not supposed to be eating gluten and sugar and all of these things like that. And they're both going on in your head at the same time. That can be true with a lot of things in our relationships. We may have complicated feelings towards a person because one part is carrying all the anger of maybe something they said to you once, but another part genuinely wants to connect with them. And maybe a third part, right? So we have complicated feelings towards other people and towards situations. That's very normal. And so the first thing is for us to just be able to notice in our day what's coming up. Any strong emotion of any kind that isn't calm, courageous, loving, compassionate is probably a part. Nothing wrong with that. That's how we all operate. And so, for example, last week, I had some really strong feelings, as some of you might have had after the election. And I could feel I had parts with a lot of rage and a lot of anger. There were other parts that were like, but we're spiritual leader. We can zen our way through this. And these parts are like, no, the F we cannot. And what I knew I needed to do was to allow those parts to just express themselves. And so there's something we call blending, which is when your part basically takes over. And this happens to us all the time. It's, again, not necessarily a bad thing. It just is. When a part blends, is like if someone triggers you and makes you mad and all of a sudden you're yelling and screaming and you're like, oh crap, I'm sorry. It feels like something took over you in that moment, right? Because it did. A part took over you, but you had no conscious awareness of that happening. It just happened. So what I did last week was I allowed and was consciously letting that part take over while I was journaling and at my altar in a very mindful space, and I allowed it to express all of its feelings, both out loud and on paper, unfiltered, without judgment or condemnation. I allowed myself to be as petty and small and judgmental as I possibly wanted to be, because I knew that filtering, trying to filter myself, was censoring how that part felt. And what that part needed was compassion. That part needed to be heard. It needed to be loved. And so mindfully being aware when those parts show up, strong feelings, strong emotions. And instead of saying, I shouldn't be feeling this way, I shouldn't blah, blah, blah. That's a sign of another part that's coming in and judging, right? In reality, if something strong comes up within you, find a safe place or person where you can go or even journal and allow a full expression of that part without judgment, without censorship. Because we do that so often. As women, for example, we may censor our anger all the time. Men may censor how deeply they might feel in sadness or sorrow or loneliness. There's certain things we've been taught that we shouldn't be feeling, we shouldn't have, which is bogus because it is the human experience to have a full range of emotions, and that's information for us. We are literally learning as we go in this life, and our emotions are information. And when we squelch down our emotions, we're getting less information on the world in terms of a soul level. So if we want our soul to mature, we need to be in touch with all of these little parts and let them teach us what's going on in here. Because when we can learn all of the parts and how they're feeling and investigate and learn why they're feeling that way, that's a huge, huge level of self-learning that happens. And it gives us greater compassion for when we see other people who are carrying the same burdens that we do. If we've gotten honest with our burden of jealousy, then when we see other people acting in jealous ways, we have more compassion and understanding. If we've gotten in touch with our anger, if we've gotten in touch with our any emotion that sometimes is seen as negative, and we've gotten to the depths of why we feel that way, we're going to have so much greater compassion and less judgment for other people because we've gotten to understand that all of these feelings, all of these behaviors that people are doing in this world have a root somewhere. And that leads me to this other belief, this other tool that helps is when we have moments where we're really activated inside. We can even have a different set of language where we can say, instead of I'm anxious, we say, I have an anxious part. And if you have a part, you can think of them almost as children or friends, teachers even, and you could be like, they need attention. So if you're filled with a lot of anger, you could say, I have a really angry part that's really activated right now and needs attention and love, needs to be expressed appropriately, I need to offer myself some self-compassion. I have a depressed part that is really, really strong right now. And so I'm going to listen to that part and see what that part needs from me. Which leads me to the other thing. You don't know what the parts are going to say. I have done IFS meditations many, many times. They work best for me when someone else is guiding me. And in that moment, when I get into self and I'm guided to meet some of these parts and have a conversation with them, I am always surprised by what they say. Our brain wants to figure things out. Our brain intellectually wants to have everything like logically and rationally lined out. And that is not really the full truth of our existence. So the truth is we have these parts that really have their own little life experiences. And when we go to them and we have conversation with them, I am always surprised by what comes out. And when I've worked with other people as well, they are always surprised with what comes out. Just one small example of that, a couple months ago, I was really, really stressed out and I was feeling pretty angry and hurt over something that happened at work. And so I was able to do an IFS session with that. And I met with the angry part, and really behind a lot of that was this feeling of abandonment that was not what I thought it was going to be. It was the sense of I'm tired of doing things alone. I'm tired of figuring things out alone. I want more people around me to help me make decisions. I want more people in general. I want a feeling of life and busyness. I didn't like feeling in that moment I was spending a lot of days at work by myself. And that part was really, really reacting against that and felt abandoned in some ways. That was not what I expected at all. And so having that conversation allowed me to just be a little bit more aware of what I needed. That I needed to reach out a little bit more to people, that I needed to have more lunch meetings with some girlfriends, that I needed to just ask for more help at work. And that was good. It was a really good awareness. So to conclude this video, there's so much we could do with IFS, but I will say this. First, if you buy into this fact that we are multiple inside, know that you may have multiple reactions going on throughout the day and week. And when you have really, really strong feelings about something, don't judge yourself for having those strong feelings one way or the other. All of us are going through this fascinating life journey experience, and we're picking up on so many different traumas throughout our life. A strong reaction just means that there's a bruise that maybe we don't even know about that somebody accidentally pushed on. And of course, you're going to react if someone pushes on a bruise, right? And the same thing is true for other people. If other people are reacting strongly, it's very likely that they are blended with a part that is trying to protect them, that is reacting strongly against their own bruises. As Dick Schwartz, the founder of IFS, said, most people are just walking around with protectors blended at all times. Very rarely are we in self. So the second thing is cultivating that sense of self, finding moments where you get in touch with your compassion, where you get in touch with a sense of clarity and wisdom. For some people that meditation works, but any sort of creative endeavor where you feel like your full, wonderful, joyful self. Chances are that is actually getting you in touch with your core self. And then third, anytime you get those strong feelings that come up, give yourself that time to let them express themselves, and then give them love. It can be really hard, especially with parts that we don't like the inner critic, or parts that we think are self-sabotaging to us, parts that are expressing emotions that we think are bad, or that have thoughts that we think are bad. If we encounter those parts without judgment, and we can do that, we can ask our judgy parts to move aside and just allow them to express themselves and see what might lie underneath all of that. If we can offer that level of compassion to ourselves, that is going to give us so much healing and such a better way for us to be able to greet other people who are going through difficult times or having perspectives that we also think are bad or dubious. And so this begins a massive healing on our planet when we attend to ourselves with non-judgment and full compassion, which is a practice. Oh my gosh, is it a practice? But when we can offer that to ourselves, we are so much more likely to offer that to other people. And to me, that's one of the most spiritual things we can do on this planet right now, is to love ourselves unconditionally and without judgment. Practice baby steps, and slowly learning to do that to other people, one person at a time. I hope this was helpful for you, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.